does anyone else need to just say, whew, what an amazing movie. What an amazing movie. We can say that again, can't we? And so tense. I watched it the first time, you know, at home by myself. It was really interesting watching it in a theater. And I imagine for you guys, you know, you see a lot of people shaking their heads and just perched up like this. What is it like to watch this film again and again and again?
I love watching it with an audience because as a filmmaker, you get an idea what works, what doesn't. I also think that it's a lot of what we felt going through this experience with them. And I think that's maybe what this film does best. It's conveying what it's like to be in those shoes. Sometimes, you know, it's not like the most perfect camera work, but it's almost meant to be that way. It's not that we didn't have the best cinematographers. We did. Sometimes when you're finding yourself with the best camera and the best lens that you're using, and a smuggler turns up just when you weren't expecting, you're gonna get this sort of, and just the way it shakes the family and kind of throws them off balance, it threw us very often off balance, and I think that that's the feeling of being a refugee and being kind of on this move the whole time, and that's maybe what the film conveys.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you identified this particular family. And maybe, Josh, give us a little bit of background on the project in general. What motivated the making of this film?
So, you know, we started this project years ago, actually. It was around 2015, 2016, late 2015. And we had done a lot of work with women and girls. We'd worked with Nick Kristoff and Cheryl Boudin, worked on these projects that were transmedia projects, Half the Sky and A Path Appears. And we were looking at what was happening with refugees and with conflict around the world and seeing a record number of conflicts breaking out in the world and a record number of people being displaced. And so we developed a project that was called Humanity on the Move, which was about telling human stories of people forced to leave their homes. And we started to look at multiple places in the world where there was an influx of refugees. And of course, you know, we were looking at Europe and what was happening specifically in the Aegean Sea and refugees coming over from the Middle East, from Syria, from Iraq, Afghanistan, into Greece. And at that point when we began filming in 2016, tens of thousands, I think something like 15,000 people had amassed at the Greece-Macedonian border. And Europe had just started to shut its doors to refugees. And there was a switch in the policy. So we sent a scout down into the camp because we thought this would be a very compelling place to tell this story of what was happening to so many hundreds of thousands of people who were trying to get through Europe. And we found Guevara. We got an interview for Guevara, and literally the next day, Tayla went out to meet with him and meet with the family and really, you know, get them on board and really, you know, convince them. They wanted to do this film, but I think, you know, it was really Tayla who got all of the access and got them to really get enthusiastically behind it.
Tayla, tell us a little bit about identifying this particular family of all of those families at the camp.
Yeah, and all of those potential stories that we got. It was, I mean, in a camp with 10,000 people at the time I got there, there were 10,000 stories. And they were incredible. I mean, this couple who were trying to find their kid in Norway, this band of brothers that sort of formed, all Afghan boys who didn't know each other before. This couple, young, newly married, and she was in very advanced stages of her pregnancy. So many stories, but there was something really appealing about this family. The fact that it was 3 generations, and they didn't always see the situation they were in the same way. The fact that they had so much dignity, they were not willing to sort of give in to the circumstances. Grandmother insisted that every day they're going to have a family meal. The mom, Shireen, kept insisting that the tent will be tidy and clean. There was a lot of sort of, we're going to try and create some sense of normalcy, and I saw that right away. And there's something that I thought would be easier to relate to than this, you know, those the great footage that you had in the summer before that, of just masses of people where you couldn't quite pick on them and you could say, oh, this has nothing to do with me. But when you see a family and their interaction and the way they try to keep things normal, the way they had it at home to some extent, to the most extent they can, seemed like a good way to sort of open the door to tell a story about refugees in a different way.
So they are trying to make their way stealthily across how many countries, as it turned out to be. How did you convince them that it would be okay to have a camera crew along with them?
Sometimes I had to convince them twice a day that it was okay to have a camera crew follow along. I think Guevara, who is very important in the family, has a very important role in terms of leadership. He communicated how much it was important for him to have this story told. And he firmly believes in what he says at the end, that we are just one story out of so many, and the world needs to see those stories, and the world needs to hear that. So sometimes I needed to have him and Hiba on the other side sort of arguing the case when another generation wasn't fully on board. Sometimes, and this is something that I heard only later from Abdu, the older brother, sometimes they didn't realize how much energy they were sort of getting from the fact that we were there, that we cared, that we wanted to know what's going on with them, that we wanted to be there with them. So that, in a sort of not unintentional way, I guess, also had some role.
So it was a little symbiotic. You were watching their story and they were getting something from being watched.
I think so.
Yeah. But there is that crisis point with the ankle. Like, how did you, as a filmmaker, I'm guessing, you could have brought her to a hospital. What was that decision-making for you?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very, very tense night. And getting them back on board after this incident wasn't the easiest thing either, because some of the family believed that we had to do something with the fact that they got caught. But yeah, I mean, they're not criminals. The fact that some EU agreement criminalized what they're trying to do doesn't make them real criminals. They are people fleeing for their lives. And unfortunately, if we were to take them in a car or to bring them to a hospital, bring a doctor to them, and we got caught, we would be facing human smuggling charges in Macedonia. There was also a decision as a filmmaker, not just something we talked about, not just not to break the law where we worked, but also not to alter their journey. So sort of, if we weren't there, what would have happened? So in that case, and some of it doesn't get told, we sort of do a shorthand sometimes in film. We got in touch the best I could do. We talked a lot about it. Josh was in New York. I was in Greece, and I said, okay, what we could do is we can tell Doctors Without Borders that we know people that has happened to them. From there, we leave it up to you. If you want to give them your location, I have no responsibility. If you want to tell them, send us a doctor, I have no idea what they're going to do with the information. That's the most, so it's up to you. I can tell Doctors Without Borders, that's the contact that I have, that we know there's a family in crisis, that there's someone badly injured. Or I can tell them, I can make the connection, and that's where we left it. And they, I think, debated that for a good 3 hours and eventually decided to get in touch. I gave them the number, they got in touch, and what happened is that Doctors Without Borders, who weren't operating in Macedonia, told the Red Cross. The Red Cross, instead of showing up to help, felt obliged to tell the local police, who showed up instead of the medical help and before any medical help, and arrested all of them, and didn't provide actually initially any medical help. When we see them coming back to Idomeni, that woman with her broken ankle was left a mile ahead of the border, and she had to walk it with the help of her kids across again.
I'm wondering, Josh, for you back in New York, and obviously before making this film, and you're with an organization that had made films following other humanitarian crises and other refugees crossing borders. I think it's South and Central America, correct? Yeah. So how do you make that negotiation and make that decision beforehand? We will be non-interventionist. What were those discussions like?
Well, we talked a lot about it. I mean, I think for us as filmmakers and documentarians, there's always a line you have to be conscious of crossing where you start to step over it and can influence certain events, and you can start to get in the way of people's lives as opposed to really following their story and their life and giving them a platform where their story comes forward. And I think that in this case, it was pretty clear journalists were getting arrested, people were getting harassed by police, anybody with a camera was sometimes being detained, and there was a very real concern at every border crossing that the camera team just could not be with the family because if they were, they would be arrested as smugglers. And in the same way, you know, with the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders, they had told us after the fact that they had to be very conscious of not breaking the law because they would be seen then as, you know, breaking the country's laws and possibly being thrown out of the country. So there was all of, you know, media activists, NGOs were all kind of unsure of what the next steps were. And I think for us in this story and in the other stories we tell, we always have that guiding sense of, well, we're going to tell a story that has integrity and honesty. We're going to present what happens as it happens to the best that we can, and we're not going to try to influence or step into situations. And I think it's a real commitment to the craft, but I think it's also a respect for the people you're working with, where, you know, you and Tayla did such an amazing job of communicating, this is where we stand on this, this is how we will work. Are you guys on board and okay with that? And that's always a negotiation, I think, in any project, any film, and building that bond of trust, I think, is paramount then to being able to you know, make the end film.
And it's very dynamic. It literally changed sometimes 2-3 times within the day, and there were times we had to sort of like, okay, we'll let you discuss this. We'll turn off the camera for the next half an hour. Is it okay now?
Yeah, and Tayla, I think you told me earlier, or in a pre-interview, I guess we did a few weeks ago, that it was hard for you because the closer you got to them, the harder those decisions became.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very close with them, and I still sort of, every piece of news that comes, I just go like, oh, or, you know, or very happy Heba just got engaged. But yeah, the closer you got to them, and you started to see how they see things. And it is really, really hard to, I mean, what have they done to deserve this? It wasn't their choice. It was just their choice to leave a refugee camp and instead of going to another one to try and make their way to the rest of the family, or to a country that has been open to hosting refugees. And that was, you know, something that was on my mind from the beginning. And the closer we got, the more tired they got, the more tired I got. It was just really, really important to sort of make sure that the lines didn't get blurred. But it was really difficult. And, you know, there are times still that there's a sister who was already in Germany, and she is convinced that we are sort of, you know, we're not their friends. We sort of exploited their story. Oh. So there are times where you got, you know, and I took that very, very hard. It's a very sensitive relationship, and it's a very, very difficult. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever made as a filmmaker.
Have they come to screenings? I mean, how do they as a family feel about the way that they were shown?
We would have loved to have them here, but as you can imagine, the immigration policy at the moment is not so friendly to Syrians. So what we did is we gave them a copy, and they asked, initially I said, do you want us to send someone to watch it with you? And I said, no, they'll get the whole family together. And so everyone who's in Germany, including those other brothers, sat together and watched it. And I talked to them after, and it was a very emotional night for them, an emotional next couple of days, because it took them to a place that, you know, it's hard to watch yourself going through this experience and, you know, being in a different place. Shireen is still, you know, to some extent, and the grandmother are still convinced that they were better off never leaving Syria. And I think they agree that this film sort of tells an important story. Heba at one point asked me if she could try and bring it to the school where she's learning German. So.
I want to let everyone know that we do have a microphone set up at the front. I can't actually see it in this light. But if you do want to ask questions, we'll definitely make some time to ask more questions. How do they charge their cell phone?
That's the one question that keeps coming back. So one thing you learn in those refugee camps is there's a cottage industry for everything. And they become these microcosms of like everything you have outside. So there was, if you needed a cell phone, there was a guy who would get you the cell phone. There was a guy who would get you the local SIM card with the data plan for the country you're going to. And there was a guy who was selling solar chargers. So they had, when they left, there were 15 of them, and they had between them something like 8 or 9 phones, all charged, and a bunch of solar panels. And Guevara was very strict. You saw him with the water, sort of not allowing them to drink too much. He was the same way with the phone. No Facebooking, no turning on to, you know, just WhatsApping some friend in Syria, which the girls would have loved to do. It was very, very strict. And there were a couple of times where they just got stuck because they couldn't move if they didn't have those phones. Mm-hmm. It was also their way to communicate with the brothers in Germany who could follow their route. They had, you know, if you do the marathon or one of those things, you have those apps where Track Me. That's how the family around the world follow their journey. And they needed that as a lifeline. So big brother Abdu sitting in Hanover and going like, don't take that road, I hear it's really dangerous, or, but I see that if you go on the right, it doesn't look like it's a, you know, guarded border. So they needed it, and without it, they couldn't move an inch.
Oh, unbelievable. Well, I couldn't help but look at them and think of so many refugees moving across Europe, 70, 80 years ago. And they did not have cell phones, obviously. But the historical resonance of that, how did you, sort of even as filmmakers, approach those parallels?
Yeah, I mean, someone said in a previous screening that the images seemed the same. I mean, unintentionally and intentionally, I had in my mind, I think I told you earlier this morning, I'm Jewish, I'm actually from Israel, the generations of my grandparents who had to go through this, who knocked on doors of countries that didn't want them, who were shipped to a place and then tried again to get to another place. Right when this whole thing started, and I just holding my head going like, I can't believe Europe is doing this again. So, the images ended up kind of looking the same, but I think it was on our mind. And the fact that these guys, and I think it's horrible to say, but in the world there's become this hierarchy of refugees, and somehow the people from Africa who go through these experiences are not getting the same treatment, but they are getting the closed doors. These look more like us, maybe, and that's why people are sort of relating to it that way, like World War II, but it happens to people who are trying to get across from Libya or taking boats from Africa to Europe.
Is Humanity on the Move, is this part of what you're doing as an organization, exposing these trips? Is that something that's still part of your mission?
Well, yeah, and I think that the historical parallel really drives it. That, I think we very consciously were looking at history repeating itself. And we saw the United States in World War II was not letting in Jewish refugees from Germany for a number of years until the war was really almost more than halfway over. We are continuing to see on our own borders in Mexico now camps like you saw in Itamini being built up where thousands of people are being held there, many of them fleeing violence in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. Violence that is coming from some of the most violent countries in the world. We're seeing it all over, as Tayla said, in Africa, throughout the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, like with the Rohingya. Right now, I think it's a moment where we want to continue to tell these films. There's countless stories, as Tayla said, to tell, but there's also, I think, a common thread through all of those. And this film, we hope, forces people to ask yourselves, what do you believe? What are your values? What are important? Are we as good as the values that we advertise to the world and to the morals that we stand behind? both as American citizens, as citizens in a Western democracy, as citizens of the world. So I think there's a need to continue to tell these stories, a need to remind ourselves that this is happening every day to thousands and thousands of people, and that we have to be as good as the values that we claim, and we need to really, I think, come together person to person, share these stories, find ways that we can get involved at the local level. I know there's a great organization here in Keene supporting refugees and immigrants. I think there's an endless ability to get involved, to find a way to talk about this and share this. And as long as this happens, we want to continue to tell these stories and create these films. So look for more on humanityonthemove.org, and we'll also have more information about our broadcasts and other screenings too.
The refugee crisis has kind of gone off the news crawl here in the United States. What is going on? I mean, obviously, it's still a very, very deep and divisive issue in Europe. What's happening now?
Well, right now, I mean, the weather's getting warmer. We were talking about this before. Thousands of people are still moving across, the Middle East, trying to get to Greece, trying to go into Europe, towards Germany. Countries are still closing their doors. Countries like Hungary have made it very clear that they don't want a single refugee there. Africa, we still have thousands of refugees who are coming up from northern Africa, trying to cross over into Spain or into Italy. So this is still happening in a big way. Right now, the United Nations is actually writing some incredibly consequential legislation about the global policy for migration. It's happening as we speak. You don't hear it in the headlines, but the United Nations will write the policy that member nations will start to will basically agree to, will be the policy going forward for migration, and refugees is a part of that. And reaffirming the Declaration of Human Rights and Refugees from 1951 is a part of that. Unfortunately, our country right now is not taking a lead role in those negotiations, but they are happening. So the world is wrestling with this issue, whether we pay attention to it or not. And with climate change, with the continued conflicts around the world, we're going to see more and more migration, more and more refugees. And so I think, the issue is not going to go away, and we have to really speak in a way that acknowledges that these are human beings like us. And as Guevara says at the end, if it could happen to their family, it could happen to any of us. So it's time that we, I think, look it in the face and address it, with the best of our nature.
And just by numbers, so there are 26 million people who are internationally displaced right now. Think about the size of how many countries can fit into that. And something that I heard, and I had to check, and it's true, the number of Syrians that the US has allowed in since the beginning of the year, and we're at the end of April. Guess anyone? 11.
Oh.
So just to give you an idea where we stand on such an important issue.
Any questions from the audience? There is a microphone up here. Yeah, we want to make sure and hear you, so please do speak into the microphone.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for the movie. When it finished the movie, I was completely sure that they were only the refugees, or 90% of the film was produced by them. So I was totally wrong, but that tells how great was the movie, because you were really behind, and everything looked like just the story that they themselves are doing it. And thank you so much for that. That was really amazing.
They did have a camera. You see in some of the
goes
footage.
To my question there. But still, I wanted to ask you the question. I work at the United Nations in New York. I am a US citizen. I was born in Peru originally. And my question is, and I work on migration. And my question is that in which ways you both made a bridge for the cell phones, you were saying part of that story, and all the electronic paraphernalia to work it out. And then, because they needed that kind of bridge to the links with the people who produce that, like you're saying, the solar recharges, stuff like that. So I was expecting something like that, but can you elaborate a little bit more how you made that merge? Because you were behind, but at the same time, all these things, they had to somehow made it work, and it looked like so seamlessly done by themselves. So just, okay, please.
Sometimes when you edit, you get, you think, how much of this frustration does the audience need to see? So they actually, we see them leaving right away, but they were trying to leave the day before. Some guy in that cottage industry saw them. They paid her 30 euros for a SIM card. It was not working. So there was a lot of that you don't see. Editing is very much, and a film like that was made over such a long period is shorthand. So a lot of stuff gets shortened. There was a lot of struggle with technology, and as I said, sometimes they got stuck if the phones didn't work. I created a system with them where they would, on WhatsApp you can send a location? So they would send me a location, I would send them a location, and we'll just be trying kind of like to figure out where we would meet, because obviously I wasn't with them the entire time. One thing that became clear to me right away, actually before I even left, I said, I'll take like a baby camera with me. Guevara, you see him at the beginning, he sees himself as a journalist sort of by nature, and he told me that he, in Aleppo, that's what he did. I didn't know that he had also some family footage at the time. And I just said, here's a camera for you. So when we are not here, when we are not with you, just feel free to roll on it, sort of explain the basics, and they're naturals. So instead of sort of zapping around with the camera, they're pretty good in holding steady a shot. And Guevara and one of the nieces, Layla, sort of took over the camera. But I have to say, earlier we were talking about moments where sometimes the family wasn't very cooperative. So grandma in Hungary decided no more camera, and she just hid the camera away. And the girls were begging to get it back so they can film what was going on. But the grandma, for 2 days, she was sulking, and she was not going to give the camera back. No matter what I said, no matter what they said, and that was it. And she's the big matriarch. No one is daring to really challenge that. So I'm glad it looks like, because that's what I think it's very much a collaboration with them. I think Guevara did an amazing job in holding this family together during the journey, and some of it is some of the intimacy that we see, the bickering that they are probably not going to be doing next to a stranger over a booty. What are you tossing away, the doll or like your extra blanket? That kind of stuff doesn't happen in front of us. Naturally, it was happening thanks to the fact that they filmed it themselves. Yeah. So it has a little bit of that home movie quality, which I hope goes through.
Was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? What is Rita doing? I just want to make sure that's on the video. So that's why I'm repeating your question.
She's doing great. She is. She has become the family translator. Huh. She's the one with the best German, and everyone would say that. So whenever Guevara or her parents or her grandmother have any, and Germany is a country that likes its bureaucracy. So whenever they have any appointment, Rita goes along as the translator. She also learned how to navigate the subway system in Berlin very well. So she's now 13. She's very into makeup and selfies. I get, a few a week. But she's doing great. It's actually, if you have to sort of think of how well they're integrated, I think Rita and Qasem, the boy, who's 2 years older, are doing the best. They have friends, they like Germany, they speak fluent German. For her, it was a golden opportunity to just study. She never, Guevara says it at the beginning, and then her mom, she never had the opportunity to have sort of a steady, life and the ability to concentrate and focus. And she's so bright. Mm. What's killing me is that how much she saw on the way. It's just that stuff you don't forget.
I wonder about that. There are several times that the camera does sort of rest on her face or her expression.
She's smarter than her age, huh?
Yes, exactly. And I wonder about, we have to wrap, but I just wanted to ask about, how do you think this is going to sit with them for the rest of their lives? And I wonder, in some ways, will the film help them interpret it in some way?
Time will tell. I would have loved to do the sequel. So let's check on them now. I really think that, at some point Abru says, oh, this is not the end of the story. We'll start writing the end of the story when Guevara gets here. But I actually think that for most of them, Berlin is not the end of the story. they've been there a year and a half now, and for most of them, it's still a temporary station. Grandma still believes, Hadja as she's called, still believes she's going back to Aleppo. She has a son who's still there. And she wants the family together. So in her mind, one day they're still going back. The others are struggling so hard with the German and with the German culture that I think it will take a long time for them to just process this as part of a journey rather than, you know.
Joshua, I'm sure that a lot of people watch this film and think, oh, what can I do? You talked a little bit about having conversations and keeping this issue in front of people. Any other action steps that we can take?
Well, there's numerous organizations, NGOs that are dealing with resettlement right now. I mean, you can go to Refugee Council USA and you can see a list of local resettlement agencies, local refugee support groups across the country. Organizations like IRC are doing incredible work, or Refuge Point, which is based in Boston and does a lot of work here in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. There are countless organizations to get involved with. Also, religious groups, you know, community events with you know, colleges. We've done this in the past on a lot of our projects, and we'll do it with these films. But I think you can go to humanityonthemove.org, you can sign up, you can find out more resources that will be posted there, and groups and places that you can get involved, and also opportunities to screen this film or the other films. There are ways that, you know, we can all kind of step in, and you know, the thing that I'll say, when we go to screen in different cities with festivals, and as we've been developing and talking about this project, people always come up and they talk about how their lives have been transformed by working with refugees, working with people who've been forced to leave their countries, and how enriching it is and how wonderful it is to be a part of that and feel like you are really helping somebody in a way that, you know, transforms their life. So that's been the feedback we've gotten, and I would encourage any of you who have any interest to find those opportunities, because it really is transforming lives and it makes such a difference.
Now, there are several resettlement centers and cities in New Hampshire, so, you know, maybe we watch this and think, oh, this is so far from us, but it is really quite close, and something that we can all touch in our lives here in New Hampshire or wherever you are from, which I think gives a special resonance for me to be connected to a much larger world from here in New Hampshire. This is actually my last ever interview for New Hampshire Public Radio. I'm leaving to move to Georgia and take a job at Georgia Public Broadcasting. So it's been my honor to be a part of this community, and a great honor to speak with Tayla, Tibbon, and to Joshua Bennett. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you all.
I just want to say, Virginia, we're really going to miss you. You have brought so much class to this, and we would like to present you with a bouquet of flowers.
Thank you. Does this mean I don't get the spa?
You're going to be here to use it.